Okay, so I've got the animation I set up last week, which I play through. You'll see just has realistic graphics set, and so it looks a little bit plain. And so I'm just going to stop that. So it's just taking a minute. There we go. And so what I wanted to show you there is that you can customize the graphics, and you can do this with any view in Revit actually. And once you realise this, you might be able to do lots of things. I think with plans and sections, this can be really effective, but also perspectives. But because you don't render plans and sections, you generally will just set a different graphics mode here. It's really relevant to those. So if you go to graphic display options, which you get by just clicking on the cube there, which you use to select wireframe and hidden line and all those other different displays, go to graphic display options, and then firstly you can see there you've got this silhouettes option. Notice how these lines are really heavy, so I can set those to be lighter, and this is just a global setting for views like this. So I can just say, right, I want them to be 0.18 or 0.1. So I get nice fine lines, and that straight away makes a big difference. Going back into graphic display options again. And then if you go to shadows, you've got the option to cast shadows there, which is really just the same as clicking on the shadows button down here. But then, well, I'll turn that on first, just so you can see those regular shadows. But then I'm going to go back to there and then turn on the other option, ambient shadows, or show ambient shadows. So if you haven't worked with ambient shadows before, it's an important thing you need to understand, not just for rendering with a 3D program like this, but also rendering in Photoshop. I think if you don't do ambient shadows when you're rendering in Photoshop, you're not going to get very good renders at all with Photoshop. And so I'll even go back and turn the regular shadows off. Well, I could just do that down here, of course, just so you can see. The normal shadows, yeah, definitely. But the ambient shadows are independent of the lighting direction. And so if you haven't done ambient shadows in Photoshop, I'd be starting to look at that as well. They're really important, just as a general rendering technique, especially nowadays it's almost seen as standard. So notice how here, wherever surfaces meet together, and this is the key to it, where surfaces are joining, you should have these extra shadows, so you can see along the edge there, it's darkened. And here, all around those areas where the surfaces touch. So at the base of the columns there, a bit hard to see on the projector, but you hopefully can see those shadows there. But definitely in the corner here, it's really clear because that's a light surface. So they add a lot more depth to any view really that has shading, and just a lot more realism and sense of it being 3D. And so then the directed shadows, or directional shadows, are based on my sun direction. So if I go to sun settings, so that's the button next to your graphics options, go to sun settings there, and you can either type in an angle, which is what I've done, or if you go to still, then you need to use the date and time. And there, it might be a good idea to turn the ground plane off, because you don't probably want shadows cast out into the empty space here. If I click apply, you can see then that the shadows maybe aren't great at this time of day. But if I change the time, then the angle of the shadows is going to change. And I can probably get something similar to what I had before. Okay, so you've got those options for shadows, but then you can take it much further. So going back to graphic display options, if you go down further, you've got lighting options. And you can actually even turn on artificial lights in these realistic displays without rendering or anything. And so I'll show you that with an interior though. For an exterior like this, I probably don't need them. But you can also adjust there the ambient light, and that's going to make these areas that are really dark much lighter. You can adjust the shadows independently there as well, so that's going to make the shadows darker, or I can make the shadows lighter. So you can get a lot of control over the way that view looks. And then going even further, you've got photographic exposure control. I just tick enable there, and then apply. Now I can use this slider, so I'm just going to go to manual, and if I bring that down to the left, it'll make the whole thing lighter. To the right, it'll be darker. And then finally, you've got colour correction, and then you can fine-tune those individual elements even more. So I might want the white point to be different, and that can give you some really interesting effects. So particularly for animation, where you won't have time to render them at this stage, this can give you the opportunity to just get a more interesting and maybe higher quality result than if you use the the uncustomized settings. So I might bring the shadows maybe a bit more up there, and maybe the sunlight as well. It could be made a bit less bright. Well, you might, if you can't get enough sunlight, then it might be a good idea. Right, so this one is obviously lit fairly well by the sun, and so I won't make you watch me export it, but I'll just show you. If I go to export this now, just to remind you there, you still want to make the resolution really high, so I'd be aiming for at least HD resolution, which is 1920 by 1080. So here you can see these numbers are much lower. But like I said, at least 1920 by 1080. If you can go higher, that'll be even better. And I'm going to aim for 2,500 for one of those dimensions. And then the key here is to just click into the field on the right, and it'll adjust automatically because it'll keep those two numbers in proportion. So this is the first number is the width. The second number is the height, so if I make the first number bigger, it'll automatically just adjust the height accordingly. Don't click into that zoom field below because that'll reset the numbers back to the original size, 100% of what they were. So I've got to type those in again now. So the key is just to click to the number on the right. If I was to click OK now, that would go through and make the animation file, which would take a little bit longer than if I hadn't customised all of those settings, but still nothing like rendering. So, well, actually, I will start it. I won't make you watch the whole thing, but I'll just start it off, and you'll see, again, got to use a compressor, so Microsoft Video 1 there should always be okay. And go through now, one frame at a time, so you can see a bit slower than last week, but still it's already done a few frames. Very slowly, of course, but still, achievable. We've got 300 frames, so if it takes maybe 2 seconds a frame, that's still only 600 seconds, and so it's 10 minutes. And like I said, I'm not going to make you watch me do that. It's just going to cancel that. And then show you how it could work with an interior. So I'm going to go to the interior walkthrough, go back further so we can see some lights. And so this is one I did that's a little bit different to what I showed you last week because it's just sort of orbiting around that bar. Don't forget you can of course adjust your field of view to show you more, but if you go too wide it can be a little bit unusual with walkthroughs, so just be careful there, but I think that's still not too bad. Probably adjust the target there a little bit more, but I'll leave that for now. Oh yeah, sure. So okay, so to adjust the height, if you go into an elevation, so you should know the name of your walkthrough. So here mine's walkthrough 6. So I'm going to go to any section or elevation, and so here, well, I'll show you the plan. Okay, so that's my plan. There's the area that I'm spinning around. So I want to be probably looking from down here, which is my south elevation. And I can't see the walkthrough path anymore, so I'm going to go and find that in the project browser, right click on it and choose show camera. Now I can see it, but it's mostly hidden inside the building there. So I'm also going to change to wireframe, and I'll just make it easier to see. And then back to edit walkthrough. And so I can change the angle the camera's looking by dragging the target there. I'll undo that. And then that's at a certain point on the animation. It's where I was looking before. So to see that in plan, if I go back to floor plan, again, because sometimes just going to click edit walkthrough again, so you can adjust it. So that's showing the camera there at the beginning of that animation path. And so if I want to make it look up at different points along that path, you're going to drag the camera to the point where you want to adjust it. Or you can use these buttons here to adjust the position of the camera as well. So that's going to the next keyframe.
So essentially we're looking at trying to get someone who is at our kind of party is walking through.
Yeah.
It's like within perspective, not like kind of a bit.
Generally, yeah. And it's by default set to normal eye level. So it's about 1700. And then...
Just changes its direction.
Yeah, that's left and right. And then if you want to look up and down, then you do need to be in the side view.
Drag the camera.
No, so that's the position of the camera on the path. And yeah, you can drag it. Whoops. You can drag it along the path. Sorry, I keep missing it. There we go. So you can drag the camera to different points along the path as well. But that's not editing anything. That's just changing the point you're at in the animation. So then if you go back into that elevation view, then here, if I adjust, I can't really do anything to change the camera, but I can drag this point here, which is going to change the direction the camera's looking. So that could make it look up and down. So, so maybe I'll do that. I'll just make it look up at that point. And so now, if I go back, you can see that it's looking up and then looking back down because I only adjusted that height at that point along the animation path. And then if you want to actually have the camera moving up and down instead of just making it look up and down, you've just got to change that option up here. So I'll go back to my south elevation, and then you've got here the option set to active camera. And so if you change that to path, then you can drag these points, which will lift the camera up and down, because that's changing the path that the camera is moving along. So if I lift that point up, I don't know which point that was, but it was one that was over on the right-hand side, either the beginning or the end. It can be a bit confusing with a path like this because it's basically circular. But I'll just assume that it's at one end or the other. And then going back to look at that animation. Okay, so I'll go back to the beginning, play that through. So you can see then that's looking up, looking back down, and now, yeah, so it was at the end, I think. Here we go, so that's lifting up and then back down. Okay, so with simpler paths, it's easier to adjust the height, and that's probably what you want to aim for. Keep the paths fairly short and simple to begin with. But then again here, just to come back to those graphic display options, so here I'm going to set it to realistic again. It's a bit dark. If I turn shadows on, it'll be really dark. So I might try going to sun settings and getting the angle similar to what I had in the other walkthrough. So with winter sun, I can probably get the sun coming, partly into that space. But it still won't go all the way. Maybe if I go back to June or July, maybe the end of June, I can get it to go a bit further, but still it won't go all the way. So that's about as far as I can make it go, probably. But then if I go into the graphic display options, well, I'll turn ambient shadows on because they're just a nice effect to have. And then back to lighting, of course, I can then reduce the intensity of the shadows there. So that should make the space darker. I can increase the ambient lighting, which will make this area lighter. And then maybe I'll make the sun brighter still. And then probably for a scene like this, the most important thing would be go to photographic exposure, enable it, go to manual, and then try make some adjustments there. It's a bit hard to see this all at the resolution I've got, so I'll have to just minimise some of those panels. There we go. Okay, so how much better is that with just that photographic option? It's much brighter. But you still also have the option of turning lights on. Now, this will slow it down a lot, so that's where you've got to be a bit careful. And you probably can achieve most of what you need with the exposure, but I'll show you the lighting anyway. So here you've got under lighting, exterior sun only, it's just like rendering. So there I can go to interior sun artificial. Now I've got to minimise that so I can get to the bottom, apply, and you can see already it's going to slow it down a bit. Still quicker than rendering. And with these graphics cards, these computers should cope with this. Fingers crossed anyway. But this might give you an idea of the difference. I've got a few lights in there, but still not as many as you'll probably have in your projects in the end. And this is just for one view. It's much nicer. And if I fine-tune the exposure control there now, then I'll start to maybe see the tonality of the lighting even clearer. And maybe then bring the ambient light up a bit and fine-tune things in different ways. Oops, let's go back down to 14. Okay, but you saw then how long it takes just to do one view. I'm going to save this file now because it's likely to crash when I do the next thing. So if I was to go and try and export this now to an animation file, it'll probably work, but it might look like it's crashed, and you won't know for sure unless you leave it for about 10 minutes and just hope for the best. So, but still, it's better than rendering. I mean, to render this would take hours, if not days. Still, again, set the resolution really high or it just won't look very good. And again, another good tip, do it to a local drive rather than doing it to your network drive or to a USB or anything like that. Just use the documents folder on your computer and you can copy it from there afterwards. So if I click save, see already it's thinking a bit, but it's still got to ask me about the compressor, so that should come up next. Very slowly. Anyhow, it should get there in the end, but I'll leave that and let you experiment with those things. But just trust me, if you try this, if you're doing realistic displays for plan views and sections, where you maybe had shadows as well, especially, which can be a really nice thing to have, especially for sections, then they'll look much better if you fine-tune those graphic display options. You can get really effective displays, and it might save you doing a lot of the rendering in Photoshop. You can still, of course, enhance them further in Photoshop, but you know, of course, if the computer's doing the work for you, that's always a good thing.